Coming up on this edition of The Climate Show, we've got the documentarian behind the brand new documentary called Revenge of the Electric Car. Will we in fact see the electric car make a return? Yes, a return in 2012. And Gareth, we've also got plenty of news.
Yeah, we're going to do a debrief on Durban to find out what actually happened at that conference in South Africa. And we're going to look at some extreme weather. We're looking at flooding in New Zealand and the Philippines and a record year for extremes in the USA. Plus,
the solutions in there as well. All that and more coming up on this edition of The Climate Show. This episode of The Climate Show is brought to you by hot-topic.co.nz, cyblogs.co.nz, skepticalscience.com, scoop.co.nz, idealog.co.nz, and Kiwi FM.
Drop in the ocean. What good is a drop in the ocean?
Hi there and welcome along to The Climate Show. This is episode number 23, recording the 18th of December 2011. The final show for 2011. It's a show all about climate science, climate policy, news and solutions, plus the skeptics as well. My name is Glenn Williams, broadcasting here from Ponsonby in Auckland City, and my co-host, as always, in Waipara, North Canterbury, Gareth Ronalden from hot-topic.co.nz. Welcome back, Gareth.
And a very merry, not quite Christmas to you, young Glenn.
Yes.
Jingle bells, jingle all the way, he said in his best Moncton voice.
Do go on.
Anyway, so there we are. We're here again. It's episode 23. Gosh, it seems like a long time ago we started doing this, Glenn.
Yeah, well, just over a year, I suppose. Did we have a celebratory episode? I can't remember. Maybe we make it this one. It's very festive, of course. Apologies, there is no festive music going on in the background, but we might not own the rights to that, even if we did have it anyway. That could be a problem.
Yes, and I have to say, my boughs are not decked with holly, sadly, but never mind.
Yeah, oh well. But we do have a great show lined up for everyone today, because, of course, last time we were talking, Durban hadn't quite happened, and there was some news out sort of beforehand about what might or might not happen. Of course, now it has happened, so we're going to be talking about that soon. There's been a lot of rain in New Zealand, and we're going to talk about that. Plus, all our...
There's been rain.
Yeah.
There's been rain in many places around the world, just overnight in the Philippines. But as I say, we'll talk about that.
Our special guest, who I spoke to a little bit earlier on in the week, is Chris Payne. Now, he was the documentarian behind Who Killed the Electric Car, the story of why the electric car kind of was happening in California for a bit and then it sort of disappeared. Well, he's now done a follow-up documentary called Revenge of the Electric Car, which I haven't seen yet because it's not out in New Zealand, but I thought it would be a good opportunity to talk to him in more of a solution sort of context for this show to figure out if the electric car is indeed going to be coming back in 2012. And we'll have some solutions at the end, in fact some game-changing technologies that promise some climate change optimism at the end of the show. But before we get into it, just reminding you that if you come across this show perhaps on YouTube, we do have a home. It's called theclimateshow.com, where you can find all the links to the other shows that we've done, plus the various podcast RSS links, and also the audio, plus the links to our social media, twitter.com/theclimateshow and facebook.com/theclimateshow. All that stuff is also up at hot-topic.co.nz. But let's get into it. Let's start off with Durban, Gareth.
Yes, indeed. The verdict on Durban, I've called it in my first kind of reaction to it. I call it a mad deal in Durban. And by mad, I meant it was mutually assured destruction, because the basic outcome of it, and on screen at the moment we've got a guest post from Mark Linus, who is the author of 6 Degrees, that we carried at Hot Topic as well. But I thought it was mutually assured destruction because the basic analysis is you're going to end up with a continuation of Kyoto. So those countries that are in the Kyoto Protocol can, if they wish, carry on using Kyoto mechanisms up until, they don't know whether it's going to be 5 years, 8 years or whatever, but anyway, up until about 2020. They have then agreed that they will have some kind of binding multinational, everybody involved mechanism for emissions reductions from 2020 onwards, and they're going to try and negotiate what the framework for that by 2015. So my feeling was that really they couldn't get any decision quickly, and so they kind of kicked the can down the road. And so there's a bit of everything, there's a bit of something in there for everyone, but there's no real basic decision. And one of the reactions that I saw was from an organization called Climate Action Tracker, who go to considerable lengths to work out what is going to happen if the commitments that are on the table today actually happen. And what they're saying is that although the agreements, the Durban platform as it's called, is a step towards getting a good global action going, where we're currently pointing at is warming of more than 3 degrees Celsius. So in Durban, everybody pays lip service to the idea of a 2 degree Celsius guardrail, as they call it, and the the Maldives and the Pacific Island nations, the group of small island nations, would much prefer that we went for 1.5. But what's actually on the table at the moment is likely to take us to 3 degrees or more of warming by the end of the century. And that really, for many small islands, and likely for the whole climate system, and possibly for everybody on Earth, is a fairly disastrous policy setting. So I call it mutually assured destruction simply because everybody's in it, everybody's agreeing to this stuff, but they don't seem to be completely understanding what's at the end of the day going to happen to the planet.
So does that mean there was some skepticism present at Durban?
Oh yeah, I mean amusingly, the only way that an American organization called CFACT, the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, who they've been campaigning for inaction on climate change for many years, and their head honcho Mark Morano took Lord Monckton to Durban, but the only way they could get any attention was by jumping out of an aeroplane. They had to skydive with banners to try and get the world's media to give them any attention at all. And I think we can assume that within the four walls of the Durban conference, those sorts of antics were being roundly ignored.
Right.
And the fact is that, I mean, there was skepticism in there in terms of those sorts of people, but in fact I think everybody in the international negotiations arena pays lip service to the idea that we should try and limit warming. But when it comes down to actually negotiating, everybody is so concerned about their national interest, about economic growth, about protecting their investments, whether they're, whatever they may be. Australia wants to carry on selling coal, for instance. So when you get down to the actual nitty-gritty of negotiation, national interest seems to trump international welfare. And it's, you could argue international relations has always been like that. And with it's an old cliche. People talk about climate change being a difficult problem, a wicked issue, Our system just simply isn't set up to cope with something that isn't going to happen necessarily tomorrow, but in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years' time. And this is not a trivial issue. We've got to rejig the world's energy system. And there's going to be a lot of jostling and a lot of kind of horse trading going on before we end up with a form of action. And so, as I said in my piece at Hot Topic, my feeling is that the world will only begin to take this seriously when there have been a number of disasters that can be so clearly linked to a changing climate that there will be a demand for action. So the affected peoples, whether they be North Americans or Indians or Chinese or Indonesians or Australians or whatever, the demand for action will be there, and the politicians will then feel that they have the mandate to go ahead and do what needs doing. Of course, the downside of that is that at the point that happens, we've still got 30 years of warming in the pipeline,
Yeah.
even if they manage to sort of sort everything out on a sixpence.
So,
And-
so,
and-
so is, and getting back to that whole thing about an actual major event having to happen before there is that demand. I mean, is this just like a big macro example of our own individual inaction when it comes to things in our daily lives, like the rusty roof, and we won't act on the rusty roof until there's a hole and then it starts leaking. That it's inherent within all of us that we generally, most of us, procrastinate about stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're as animals, we're designed to respond to immediate stimuli. So, so that somebody sticks a pin in my bum, I'm going to try and get away from the pin.
Yeah.
But if somebody's standing there with a pin, I might assume that they're actually going to be doing some sewing, rather than sticking the pin in me. I've got a bit of a leak in my roof that I need to deal with too. So, these absolutely, it's national interest, personal interest. It's a kind of slow problem that's hard to deal with, and there'll be a lot of comparisons with, and indeed, the experience of the last World War, World War II in 1939, the American economy and the European economies were turned on their heads in the space of a few months to go from normal manufacturing into armament manufacturing in order to prosecute this war. So yes, the economies of the world can be turned around on a sixpence, but it's bloody expensive to do that. And so if we wait, whatever it takes, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, before we begin to do that, the cost of doing it is going to be so much higher than if we'd started now or 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And so, the bottom line on Durban is that, yes, it's a continued series of small steps in the right direction, but there's no sign of it actually delivering the sorts of results that are required that will mitigate the worst effects of global warming. And in effect, it commits us to more damage, because the longer we leave serious action, the greater the resulting damages will be 10, 15, 20, 30 years' time. So depressing, good stuff, bad stuff.
Yeah. It's all in the mix. Okay. Well,
it is.
Let's move along. Water everywhere, including New Zealand over the past week. It seems it's been raining forever here in Auckland, but not as bad as in the Nelson region, which I suppose is closer to you, Gareth.
Yes, it is indeed, and we've got lots of friends in that area, and we holiday there regularly and love it dearly, love it to bits. The Golden Bay, Abel Tasman, Tasman Bay and Nelson area is one of the most stunningly beautiful parts of New Zealand. It is also prone to getting heavy rainfall events, because it's at the top end of the South Island, and in the last few days, the Nelson and Golden Bay region has had torrential rain. And I wanted to mention it in the context of this show, because I think the Tasman District Council said something like 674 millimeters of rain fell in 2 days at one particular place. At Katinga, which is near Takaka, which is the main township in the Golden Bay region, and that happened in 2 days, 48 hours. So that you're doing about 67 centimeters of rainfall in under 2 days. And in northwest Golden Bay, Bainham, where they get heavy rain fairly regularly, it was said to be a 100-year record. My understanding, and I'm going to be checking this with friends at the Met Office, but my understanding was that the rainfall records in the Golden Bay area were being beaten by a margin of 100%. So you're going from the previous rainfall record being, say, 250 mils in a day to this event being 500. And they're talking about 1 in 100 year or 1 in 50 year floods. The fact is that these scales of rainfall are unprecedented in the time that human beings have been, but in time since the Europeans have settled in New Zealand. And we don't really know what a great deal about what happened before anybody got here, of course.
Yeah.
But what we're seeing is consistent with what we expect from global warming. We expect global warming to cause increased and intensifying rainfall events. In fact, when we had a Kevin Trenworth on our show earlier this year, back in February, was it? Yeah, February, early March.
I think so, yeah.
Shortly after the Christchurch earthquake. Kevin was saying that basically climate change is affecting all of our weather because the world is warmer than it was, and a warmer atmosphere holds more water vapor. And so every weather event is taking place in a different context, in a changed climate. And what we're seeing in these sorts of rainfall events is this, there's more water vapor in the atmosphere. So when heavy rain events happen, the rain is heavier. So I just wanted to draw attention to the Nelson flooding because it is quite remarkable and is beating old records by considerable margins. And then overnight, in the last sort of 24, 48 hours...
just before we leave New Zealand, I just want to say that it wasn't that long ago that NIWA was saying that we should expect a dry, long, hot summer. Now, of course, we're not into January yet, and that is traditionally where it starts getting dry in New Zealand. But I don't think they picked these kinds of weather events to be happening, even though it's a La Nina system we're under at the moment.
Yeah, the La Nina weather pattern usually brings warmer, drier weather to the east coast of both islands, but because, and you'll have to forgive me for not knowing the detail on this, but my understanding is that Australia, for instance, gets a lot of rain on its east coast during a La Nina event because, at the beginning of this year, there were those floods in Brisbane, the enormous flooding in Queensland.
Yeah.
My understanding is that the flooding that's happened in Nelson, the rainfall there, basically is a stream of air that's come down from the subtropics, from the Queensland area, like a river of rainfall, if you like, a river of moist, humid subtropical air that's bumped into the hills of the northwest South Island and dumped all its water. And that river was pointing at Nelson and Golden Bay for a couple of days, and hence a huge amount of rain fell. And some of the, you've got the pictures on screen at the moment, some of the slips that have happened are just huge. Some of the dairy farms have had their entire grazing flooded. It may take them a month or several, even 2 months in some cases to dry out before they can even put their cows back onto these paddocks. So very big economic impact in terms of recovery and repair. And then I started monitoring this news item yesterday. Suddenly we've got a tropical storm, one of the latest ever tropical storms, to hit the Philippines, and it hit the southern island of Mindanao and has killed 400 people.
Wow.
It's huge amounts of rain falling in an area that doesn't that often get rainfall of this scale from a storm that is one of the latest on record. So normally the sort of subtropical storm season in the tropical north of the equator is coming to an end or has ended now. The North Atlantic hurricane season is usually over by sort of the end of October into November. Here we've got a Southeast Asian storm happening and causing enormous damage in the Philippines. And I go back to what my comment there about Kevin Trenworth. You've basically got weather events happening, extreme rainfall events that are absolutely in line of what we might expect from a warmer and wetter climate. And that leads me very nicely into the next item, which is, or the next link, if you like, and that is that NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration of the US, reported that 2011 was a year for the record books because there were 12, count them, billion-dollar disasters in the course of the year. So these are weather events, extreme weather events, that have caused at least $1 billion of worth of damage.
Huh.
So we're talking about extreme drought, we're talking about heat waves, we're talking about floods, tornado outbreaks, hurricanes, wildfires, and winter storms. It's an all-time record. They haven't had that many events. In fact, there are another two events, recent events, which may turn out to be billion-dollar events as well, which would bring the total to 14. But as of the beginning of December, there were 12 as of December the 7th. So we can run through them. There was the Groundhog Day blizzard on the East Coast in end of January, beginning of February. The Midwest Southeast tornadoes in April. The Southeast Midwest tornadoes also in April, a few days later. And then in the Midwest, in April, and Southeast Ohio, at the end of April, more in May, more tornadoes in June, and then drought and heat wave through spring and fall, right through the summer there in Texas. Mississippi river flooding, enormous river floods, Midwest flooding, Hurricane Irene drenching the East Coast, and then the wildfires in Texas and New Mexico.
Yeah.
So the graph that you've got up on screen now comes from Jeff Masters' post on the subject, and it's a NOAA graph. And what it's showing is that if you look at it in terms of numbers of billion-dollar events, it's a record by a margin of, I think, 3. The highest was 9 before that, and that was back in 2008. But if you then take the dollar cost, there's obviously a big year in the middle there, the sort of big peak. That was the year when the hurricane hit New Orleans. Katrina hit New Orleans. So that caused a big spike. But you're looking at far more weather disasters happening in North America than used to happen. Now, is that a sign of wild and wacky weather? Well, again, it's consistent with what we would expect from climate change.
On the face of it, yeah.
Yeah. Obviously, there are other things going on. People in America, particularly in the USA, do want to live in places like Florida. They do like to have homes on the seashore. So they get them, they can be affected by these sorts of weather events. So people put themselves in the path of danger, and then when danger turns up. But it does seem that these events are happening more often, and they're more damaging when they do happen.
Indeed.
So, yeah, and then during the course of the Durban conference, the World Meteorological Organization issued their take on where 2011 was likely to finish up. So this is based on temperatures up to October. And they're talking about it being the 10th warmest year in the record, but it will be the warmest La Nina year, because La Nina causes the global temperature to be slightly lower than it would otherwise be. El Nino, the opposite of La Nina, generally puts heat out into the atmosphere, and so you tend to get your record warm years in years that have El Nino rather than years that have La Nina. So the La Nina has been cooling us this year, but we're still the 10th warmest year in the record, and it's the warmest La Nina year on record. So when we flip over into El Nino, which I guess you've got to expect will happen next year, because that's the way of these things. It kind of oscillates from one condition to another.
Yeah.
It's way too early to say when that might happen, or even if it might happen. But you've got to expect an El Nino to come along quite soon, and that suggests that the next El Nino year is going to be a record-setting year for global temperature. It's worth having a look at the WMO link, because it runs through some of the global weather extremes that we've seen over the last year. Talks about severe drought and then flood in East Africa, talks about the major floods in Southeast Asia. We talked about the Thailand floods in a show a little while ago, didn't we, Glenn?
Yes.
So you've got that whole Thailand, Cambodia flooding, the Mekong River Basin, and so on. You've got the big events in the US and Canada. Central America had some mind-boggling major flooding in October, with incredible kind of 1.5 meters of rain falling in a 10-day period. Yes, so it's been, in the words of the Chinese curse, it's been an interesting year so far.
And just interesting, also looking at the graph that's on screen there now, the in blue is the La Nina years. There's not actually many of them compared to, I guess, other is neutral and El Nino, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. That's right. And I don't know what sort of how they've classified the years. Whether you've got to have X months of La Nina before you classify a year as a La Nina year.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that the whole El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle gets overlaid onto and causes ups and downs in that the graph. You go to the graph below that, you can see how the global temperatures have been changing over the last 150 years, and the wiggles in that graph are caused by the sorts of things, the El Nino La Nina cycle.
Yeah. Okay. And on that page, they mentioned sea ice, and so now we're heading up to the Arctic to talk about methane.
Yeah, there is an awful lot of Arctic news to talk about, and I'm saving quite a lot of that for our next star guest, which will be Jason Box again.
But he decided to go away and have some time off right now when we were recording. How inconsiderate.
At this point, he is in Big Sur, as I understand it, which is...
Sounds nice.
It certainly does, and I'm sure he's having a wonderful weekend away from the internet and pointless drudges like me calling him up and quizzing him on the Arctic. But we're hoping to get to Jason very early in the new year and run through some of the vast amount of Arctic news that's cropped up over the AGU period and through December. A lot of things that, covering what's happened in 2011. Very interesting stuff. But anyway, I wanted to talk about methane because this was a story that kind of crept out from the American Geophysical Union conference. And it was basically over the last few years, Russian scientists have been looking at the sea to the north of Russia to Siberia. It's the East Siberian Shelf. And they've been looking for and tracking methane coming out of the seabeds there. Now, I've blogged about this a number of times on Hot Topic, and I've been trying to monitor what's been going on up there. And it seems to me that over the last few years, every time we get a kind of winter report on the last summer, the stories that come back slightly more worrying than they were the year before. There's been a significant effort to try and quantify what's going on up there. And up until last year, basically, there was no real sign that it was having a major impact on the amount of methane in the global atmosphere. It was an important source of methane to the kind of global budget, but it wasn't a huge or dominant source. Methane emissions from wetlands are much more important at the moment than the methane coming out of permafrost or out of the seabed of the East Siberian Arctic Shelf. However, one of the key scientists, a Russian, is Dr. Igor Semiletov, and I'm sure if a Russian speaker will tell me how I should pronounce that. He's from the Far Eastern branch of the Russian Academy of Sciences and has been basically one of the key people surveying this region from Russian icebreakers and other boats. And he came back and reported to the AGU that there, in a very small area, I'm reading his quote here from the Independent news item, in a very small area, less than 10,000 square miles, we've counted more than 100 fountains or torchlight structures bubbling through the water column and injecting directly into the atmosphere from the seabed. We carried out checks and discovered methane fields of a fantastic scale, I think on a scale not seen before. Some plumes were a kilometre or more wide and emissions went directly into atmosphere. The concentration was 100 times higher than normal.
Wow. Concerning why?
Well, concerning because methane is a very efficient greenhouse gas. It's about, in terms of its warming potential, it's about 20 times more powerful than carbon dioxide. So relatively small quantity of methane will have, the equivalent warming effect to a large quantity of carbon dioxide. The other side of that coin is that it doesn't live in the atmosphere terribly long. Normally, it's kind of processed out of the atmosphere in a period of about a decade to 15 years, somewhere around about 12 years probably. Most of any given pulse of methane will have been oxidized out of the atmosphere, but it gets oxidized to extra CO2. So it has a long-term warming impact. What the problem with the East Siberian shelf is that these scientists are estimating that there is an enormous quantity of methane gas under the bed. Now that's methane gas. That's not stuff that can turn into methane as it warms up, which is what's happening with the permafrost. This is methane that's already there, and it's kept in the ground, as it were, by a cap of permafrost. Now, what's been going on as the Arctic has warmed, as the sea ice has gone, warmer water has been reaching this region of the Arctic Ocean, and it's been warming up the seabed. And as it's warming up the seabed, it's beginning to make it easier for this methane to erupt and reach the atmosphere. And the big worry is that at some point, the amount of methane reaching the atmosphere will be so large that it will have a significant warming effect. And there is so much methane in that seabed that it actually has the potential to make emissions cuts done by human beings completely irrelevant. Now, to be fair, we do not know whether that will happen or when it will happen, or whether there's a trigger point for it or at what point it becomes a real risk. What we do know is that this is one of the areas of biggest uncertainty. It's one of the biggest feedbacks that we haven't yet really quantified. So every time Igor Semilitov, every summer that he goes up there and works on this stuff and comes back with worse news, then you've got to forgive me for becoming just that little bit more concerned than I was before. So there is no, I have to say, consensus on this being an urgent or something that's going to happen in the next decade. All I will say is that it has the potential to be a really, really serious thing, and we know that the first signs of it, at least, are already happening. So it's a big story. It's a very big story, and it's one that every year seems to bring slightly worse news.
Okay, so you'll keep monitoring that and do posts up at Hot Topic if you notice any changes or any developments.
Absolutely, absolutely, and perhaps sometime in 2012 we can get a methane expert on to talk about it, because the stuff that there's methane in permafrost, there's methane under the East Siberian shelf, and then there's all these methane hydrates, which is the ice that burns that exists on the seabed, and we have quite a lot of that off the coast of New Zealand, big enough for people to have talked about it as a potential source for natural gas for us to burn, which is probably what we don't want to do, but anyway.
Indeed. Well, that is our news for this episode, and gosh, there was plenty in there, and it did actually feel like a little bit of a wrap-up of 2011 as well. Very, very shortly, we'll have Chris Payne on. He is the director behind the new documentary that's out in the States, and it should be making its way around the world as well. It's called Revenge of the Electric Car. But before we get him on, I do want to mention our media partners that help us out and get the show around, one of them being idealog.co.nz in the sustain section there, where they talk about all kinds of stuff. They've actually got some news up there about Durban, the UN negotiations there, and saying that the science was sidelined. They've got some stuff up there also about sustainability labels losing their edge. Golly, that's a bit of a concern for fair trade. There's a post up there by Gareth Morgan. They've even got stuff on compost. There you go. So that's a great place where you'll also find the Climate Show posted. Also, sciblogs.co.nz, where a whole bunch of scientists from all around the country collaborate on this website by posting their thoughts on science matters, their own science that they're doing, or anything that they see in the media. And of course, scoop.co.nz, which is more of a general news site in New Zealand. They post a lot of press releases, but also do a lot of commentary as well, and just a a wee plug for something else I do. I can see it up the top there. It's called State of It, a little piece that I do with Selwyn Manning, and we talk politics in New Zealand for about 10 minutes. So that's up there as well at scoop.co.nz. So now why don't we look at things we need to know about the electric car in 2012. I mean, we've been promised perhaps that we're going to have fully electric cars on our roads for a long, long time now. We've got the hybrids out there. They seem to be becoming more popular. But what about the electric car? Is it going to be ubiquitous on our roads in 2012? Maybe it will be the year for the electric car in 2012. Well, there was a documentary out a number of years ago called Who Killed the Electric Car? And it was all about the reasons why, in fact, we don't see the electric car so common on our roads at the moment. The electric car was on the way up in the States a number of years ago, and now there is a new documentary called Revenge of the Electric Car. It should be making its way to New Zealand in 2012. It's by documentary filmmaker Chris Payne, and he joins us in the States today. Hello to you, Chris.
Hey.
Can you take us back, in fact, to your documentary called Who Killed the Electric Car, and sort of just give us a wee history lesson on what happened there?
Well, the brief history lesson is that California told the car makers if they wanted to sell gasoline cars, they also had to sell zero-emission vehicles, which at the time, the only thing you could do really was an electric car. So the car makers, everybody like Toyota, Honda, Ford, Chrysler, Nissan, they all came to market, General Motors, with pure electric plug-in cars.
Yeah.
And I happened to buy one, and it was a pretty terrific car. The problem was that there are a lot of factors behind the scenes, pressure from the oil industry, pressure from the car industry, pressure from all kinds of sources saying we don't want these cars on the road. And after 5 or 6 years, they shut the program down, they reclaimed the cars, and in many cases, they even crushed them. So we made a film about why that happened and why that was probably a bad idea.
Because many people think that the electric car isn't here because the technology isn't available or wasn't good enough. So that's not completely true.
Yeah, that's totally not true. It's like, there's two factors of that. The one is there's a lot of resistance to change in the automobile because people are very used to a certain kind of automobile and they want it to be exactly like their gas car. It's the same problem when the car came along to replace the horse. People say, well, it's not exactly like the horse. You can't like feed it at home. You can't tie it up and easily. When will the car do all that? In fact, they would even call the car the horseless carriage and say that a car had horsepower to reassure everybody that it was exactly the same. And the truth is that the electric car, the plug-in car, is in fact an advance. It's a better system. It doesn't completely replace the car, but the gasoline car. But you can do all kinds of things that you can't do with the gas car. So the people that make money off gasoline cars push back on that. They don't want to see that happening, and they'll come up with every possible explanation as to why you can't have it and you don't want to try it.
So the conspiracy theorists have been right that it is the men around the boardroom table from the oil companies that have been holding back the technology.
Well, I think it's not. I'm not really a conspiracist myself. I think a lot of it just has to do with basic human inertia. It's like, do I really need to try something else, especially with something as valuable and important to my life as a car, if you're someone who drives a car. And it's difficult for people to want to try it. And they go, well, what are the problems? I'm going to run out of battery power. It's not going to go far enough. And they make their big list of reasons. And the trick with these electric cars is you kind of have to experience them to understand what it's all about. The idea that you don't have to go to the gas station is a very powerful one once you actually experience that. And the car companies, to respond to this, have said, okay, well, wait a moment. If you're really worried about running out of power, we'll give you a plug-in hybrid so you can drive electric for the first 40 miles. And then after that, good old gasoline will kick in and you can go farther on that. I'm generally disposed to pure electric cars, which can run 80 or 90 miles. And if you're lucky enough to have two cars, your gasoline car can do the long trips for you. But most people just do short trips.
Yeah. So how far down?
In fact, they make the joke too that we don't have an airplane sitting in our driveway
Yeah.
to for that once a year that we want to fly to Auckland or something. We rent a seat on that plane.
Yeah.
And if you're going to own a vehicle, you might as well have one that's like as clean as possible, that serves most of your trips.
That's true. So if the electric car hadn't been killed off all those years ago, how far down the development cycle would we? Would they be ubiquitous right now?
I think you would see more of them. I mean, this is going to take a little while. Even when we switched from horses to cars years ago, it took 10, 20 years for this to excuse me, really get going.
Yeah. Okay, so now looking to the latest documentary, Revenge of the Electric Car, does this documentary now leaves kind of those big companies behind and actually looks at the entrepreneurs and the smaller people who are persisting with the technology?
That would have been a good idea too for the film. But what we did was we said our last film was really about watching the system fail us. Like, how the big interests came in, they take over the government, they use law, they get in the way, they destroy these things. This film is about how people on the inside of a system can work to change things from the inside. And unfortunately, the car business is very, very expensive, and people don't necessarily want to buy a car from someone they've never heard of. So what we decided to do in this film is to track it from the inside out. And we ended up going with 4 different characters, 3 people from within car companies and 1 person on the outside, and see what their obstacles are over the course of 3 years to bring electric cars to market here in the U.S.
Because has it become apparent that, like the space race, you can't rely on NASA, you can't rely on the big machine to do it for us. Now you got people like Richard Branson, who then puts out a prize and says to a whole bunch of entrepreneurs, look, you come up with the killer machine here, and we'll give you all this money. I mean, are we now heading down that route?
Well, one of our 4 characters is this guy Elon Musk, who in fact is starting a space company called SpaceX here in Southern California to refuel the space station, and I think eventually he wants to go to Mars. Elon made a fortune on PayPal when he sold it to eBay and a couple other companies. And he decided that in addition to starting a space company like Richard Branson has, as you referred to, he wanted to come into a startup electric car company and take that all the way. So we charted him for 2 years as the company went from pretty much a basement garage operation to a publicly traded company through all their obstacles. And I think your point is very right. You've got to have people on the outside of the system who say, the old guys can't figure this out. You've got to have a new generation of people coming in and pushing it. And that was why we covered Elon. So
in Revenge of the Electric Car, I mean, do you still encounter any resistance against the electric car at all?
Oh, incredible resistance. We've had General Motors has a plug-in hybrid called the Volt here that I don't, maybe an international car by now, I don't know. And they're just getting it ramped up. But every time there's any kind of problem, it blows up in the press like a huge, huge story. Just a month ago, actually it's happening right now. They ran into some problems with some crash tests with the battery catching fire. And you'd think the Hindenburg had exploded by all the press they get.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of gasoline cars get recalled for fuel leaks. Volkswagen had a recall. I think Honda's having a problem. This stuff never gets pressed. So everybody's waiting for the new thing to fail. And the sad thing about that is that something like the plug-in car, which finally gets us off the Middle East oil problem, should probably be embraced rather than all set fire to it.
Yeah. I'm talking with Chris Payne, who is the director behind Revenge of the Electric Car. Will 2012 be the year of the electric car? What about the battery technology? I mean, isn't that the thing that is holding us back? The fact that batteries are so big, so heavy, and the technology of batteries is still fairly old.
Well, I think batteries is what's really launching us forward. For years we had the lead acid battery, which is the most toxic battery in the world, and it wasn't able to do a longer range vehicle. And what's happened in the last 5 years, thanks to laptop computers and cell phones, is that lithium batteries have come into the market. So suddenly you have companies like Nissan putting $6 billion into pure electric cars run by lithium batteries to leapfrog over Toyota, who's been sticking with a hybrid strategy. So I think the advances in batteries are really making the electric car revolution possible. I don't think this will be a one-year revolution. 2012 won't be the year of everybody having an electric car, but I think it will be the first year that most people will finally get to see them available as an option in the marketplace.
Yeah, because the cars that you feature, like the Chevrolet Volt, the Nissan Leaf, and the Tesla Roadster, they're expensive cars, right? I mean, they're not in the price range of the average consumer.
Well, actually, the Nissan Leaf, I bought ours thanks to federal and state rebates here. It's under $30,000. I think around $25,000 US or something is about what we paid for that car.
Okay.
So Nissan really wants a mass marketed car with their Leaf. The Volt was in the high 30s, like $39,000 before the $7,500 rebate. So that was like a $33,000 car. So if you compare this to, higher end cars in the US, these cars are not that expensive. The Tesla, however, their first Roadster came out at like $100,000.
Yeah.
So obviously that's only for a specialty person.
I mean, that was the car of Silicon Valley startups, really, wasn't it?
Right. And basically it's a Lotus Elise. It's the fastest production car in the world. It goes 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. And, when you drive that car, you feel like you're having a midlife crisis or you're George Clooney.
Indeed. Well, what about the infrastructure? I mean, I'm sure you can plug your car in at home, but there is going to be this need for, where you park your car at work or at the supermarket or out where you're shopping, whatever, you're going to need to be able to charge the car.
Yeah. Well, the good news is that electricity is like everywhere. And, they had a problem with the hydrogen fuel cell. I'm taking you outside for a second. I hope this works on
Sure.
Skype. You don't have to be in California to run solar on your roof. I don't know if you can see it there. The way
Oh, yeah, some solar panels on the roof there.
all those
Yeah.
panels up there on the.
Yep.
Yeah. So that array on my roof on the corner of the house there, that powers. We have 2 electric cars and pure electric cars in our garage. That easily powers that source. You can't do that on a gasoline car.
Huh.
And when people can see that you can do that, even in places like Germany with overcast, or I don't know what your weather is in your part of New Zealand, but suddenly you're getting people off of the oil, and that's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, because, I mean, one issue with California, in the summer, is that everyone turns on their air conditioners. And
Right.
so, and you have these rolling blackouts occasionally, don't you? So if everyone was plugging in their cars and relying on the grid, then there's possible infrastructure problems.
Yes, but it's curious that the power companies really like the electric car, because what you can do is you charge your car at night. So when you get home from work, you plug in your car. During the day when your car is parked, the idea of mass deployment of electric cars is that you can use it to stabilize the grid. If you give the option in your car, you tell the power company they can buy power back from your car during the day when you're parked at work or something, and that can stabilize the grid. It's called the vehicle to grid. So the power companies and the defense people love this, because finally you have a way of doing of storing power locally, and if everybody's car can do that, that'll help make the project better.
Yeah. So
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. So you've got a Nissan Leaf. What is the experience of driving the electric car? Obviously, it's very, very quiet. But is it powerful enough? Can you get up to a decent speed?
I think this is it. People think the electric car is about the environment, which it is, or it's about keeping energy money in the country rather than exporting it to the oil-producing nations, which it is. But what it's really about on a visceral level is a better driving experience. And I've had electric cars now for 15 years. The first time I sat in an electric car and accelerated that car, and it was so quick off the line, really, really fast. And you didn't hear some huge engine roar behind it. It was just like all the power was there instantly. You went, well, this is really going to be the future of driving. People are going to like this better than sitting in that relic from the 20th century that has the exhaust come out of it every time you hit on the exhaust.
Yeah.
So what I hope is going to happen in 2012, and not to be like the dreamy idealist here, is that people will finally have a chance to test drive these cars, and it transcends you and I having a debate about it, or your viewers thinking about it, what it might be, and people can go, oh yeah, I tried one, and it either worked for me or I didn't think it worked.
Yeah, but see, in between the last documentary and Revenge of the Electric Car, we've had the big economic collapse, haven't we? And also of American industry and the bailouts and all that. So there's all that coming into play at the moment, and you're driving the Nissan, which is obviously not an American-made car, right? So is there this there's this need for Americans to be buying American-made products, but are Americans going to be producing electric cars in the future?
Are you boosting America there? That's awesome.
Well, I just know that from inside America. There is this thing about Americans making American products for American jobs.
Well, I have my other car that I bought is General Motors Volt, so I have one of their cars too, and both the Volt and the Leaf are terrific cars. I think GM had to reinvent itself after going into the brand purgatory after so many years of kind of mediocre cars, and they came back to market with this Volt, which is just a tremendous car. First 40 miles are electric, then it switched into gasoline. So when we made Who Killed the Electric Car, I would have been shocked if you told me that 5 years later GM would be back in the market with such a good electric car. I think that the car industry, not just GM and Nissan, but all of the car company realizes that this is going to be the future with depleting oil, with consumers asking for options, and they're all in the game.
Yeah. Can you see that a time in the near future, maybe 2012, where it becomes more shameful to be driving a gas guzzler? The Humvee, which I guess is now out of production anyway, but the big SUVs down the road. Will it be shameful to do that?
Well, I think it will be more like smoking. I mean, it's when you get into the ideas of shame and smugness in terms of what cars you drive, I think that kind of ends up backfiring. And there's even some backfiring on the Prius because, you think you're so smug, you have a Prius. But the reality is if you're using a lot less gasoline, you feel like you're a lot more in charge of your whole situation. And I think this will become more of a positive experience as opposed to one in which we feel like we're stupid for driving a Hummer.
Yeah. Okay, finally, will we see Revenge of the Electric Car in New Zealand in 2012? Because I was at the beginning of the interview, I said maybe it's coming, but hopefully, yes, we'll see it here in New Zealand.
I hope so. Yeah. We're just finishing our U.S. theatrical run in December here, and international should be happening early next year. I don't know the exact details on New Zealand, but I love it there. When I was maybe 14, I was down in the South Island touring around, and I'd love to come there and show the film myself if I get lucky.
Oh, great. We'll love to see you down here. Chris Payne is the director behind Revenge of the Electric Car. Thanks so much for your time today.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Now we're on to the many parts solution segment of the show, hopefully looking forward to a low carbon future. And today we've got some game-changing technologies that might promise some climate change optimism, Gareth.
Yes, that's right. A very interesting piece by Jonathan Lucas at the New Zealand Celsius site. And he's identified 5 technologies that he thinks have the potential to be game changers. And the first of these is biofuels. And there's a New Zealand company called LanzaTech, which has patented a method of obtaining biofuels from industrial waste gases that contain carbon monoxide. Recently, when Richard Branson was in New Zealand, he announced that Virgin Atlantic, his airline, would be using jet biofuel produced using LanzaTech's technology by 2013, which is really interesting stuff. Then he goes on to talk about organic solar technology, and these are thin, flexible solar cells that can actually be printed like a newspaper. So these things come on flexible sheets, so they're really cheap to produce. They're possibly not the most efficient solar collectors, but because they're really, really cheap, they can be used in all sorts of ways that perhaps the more expensive panels can't be. So it could be incorporated into building designs, for instance, in a whole lot of ways. You could always imagine kind of solar wallpaper or something for houses. So that was a good thing to note. And actually, there are so many interesting things happening in the technology of harnessing solar energy to directly create electricity. A huge amount of research and really interesting stuff going on. So I think he's absolutely right to identify this as a potential game changer, because at the point where solar energy becomes really, really cheap, and it is already as cheap as fossil fuels, and we'll talk about that later, if you account for it properly. It has the potential to change the whole way that we do energy generation. Anyway, the third item he identifies is biochar. And again, there's a New Zealand-based company, this time called Carbonscape, and they've got methods for producing this sort of biochar. And what they use is basically a giant microwave. As a scientist, I think, someone will correct me if I'm wrong, Chris Turney, a UK scientist who's done quite a lot of work in New Zealand, and he microwaved a potato and noticed that it went black, turned into a sort of charcoal mess. And so they've worked together to produce a microwave technology to produce this biochar, and they've now discovered a way to use microwave induced plasmas to create what's called metallurgical char, which is a type of green coke. And this can be used in steel making and significantly reduces the amount of fossil carbon that gets released to the atmosphere in the steel making process, because it's actually difficult to make steel without releasing greenhouse gases. So they reckon that could address 3.7% of global greenhouse gas uses. So that's amazing. Really interesting that it's coming from a little New Zealand company. He then identifies something at the completely opposite end of the scale, and that's Hitachi, who are one of the biggest kind of industrial enterprises in Japan, working on what they call an integral fast reactor. Now, when we talked to Barry Brook in the show a wee while back, around the time of the Fukushima disaster, when Barry talks about the nuclear future for the planet, he's basically talking about integral fast reactors, because what they do is they take the kind of spent fuel from everything else, from all the other kinds of nuclear reactors, and burn that, and then they carry on producing power for that way. So they're very efficient. They use up nuclear waste, and if they actually can be deployed quickly enough, could have a very significant impact. So anyway, Hitachi GE Energy has been granted a patent for a new IFR, integral fast reactor reaction process, and they're hoping to get it into widespread use pretty quickly.
Cool.
To get it into an existing nuclear power station within 5 years, which is quite remarkable. And then finally, the fifth thing is nuclear fusion. And this came out of left field as far as I was concerned, because I hadn't actually focused on nuclear fusion. Like most people, I think I can remember reading Eagle comics in the 1960s, where nuclear fusion was being promised as the next big thing. And it has a reputation for being something that's always 30 years away.
But always when you put the word nuclear in it, always controversial.
Yeah, that's right, except that fusion is not like using uranium. And what we're doing is using basically hydrogen and helium and forcing the nuclei together to create. So you take two hydrogen atoms, bang them together, create a helium atom, a lot of energy is given off. It's the basic process that runs the sun. And apart from an awful lot of energy, what you get left is helium. So, and the source for the hydrogen, the heavy hydrogen that's used, it basically comes from seawater. So there's an awful lot of that around. So there's been a lot of hype of it over the years. What this article points at is a US company called Tri-Alpha Energy, which has been so secretive that it doesn't even have a website, but it's just had a patent granted for a promising fusion process called field reversed configuration. And they reckon that they could have a prototype for commercial use before 2020. Now that's probably over optimistic, and I have no information that tells me that this is realistic. And until the technology's announced and discussed and people are starting to fund it, it may well remain like most of our nuclear fusion dreams, a way off in the future. But it's happening. So one to watch, as they say. So the article concludes with cautious optimism, and in a sense, yes. And I think going back to the beginning, we were talking about Durban and the kind of cautious dystopia that we seem to be creating for ourselves. The other side of our failings at international negotiations is this fact that human beings are actually incredibly smart. We're the smartest monkey, and we are making enormous technological strides at a rate, an incredible rate. The rate of change is itself speeding up.
Yeah.
And so for me, I've always been a technological optimist. I've always thought that we're smart enough to do the things, create the things, invent the things that will help us to solve the problem. But are we clever enough politically to be able to do the things that will sort the problem? So I'm a technological optimist and a political pessimist.
Well, the lady on screen certainly looks cautiously optimistic there as she stares out to sea.
Yeah, that's the fusion coming over the horizon, I think she's looking at.
Okay, moving on. The US geothermal resources, or US geothermal resources, could replace coal into the future.
Yeah, well, what they've done, this is a research that's been done by the Southern Methodist University to quantify what the geothermal resource could be in the US. And I mean, New Zealand's actually a world leader in geothermal, the application of geothermal power. We were one of the first countries to do it, and we have a lot of expertise here.
Yeah.
And we have a country which has a lot of volcanic activity on which to draw. So is the US. The US has very large areas of hot rocks that can be used for geothermal. You've got the whole Yellowstone area. There's an awful lot of it around. And so what they've done is they've tried to quantify what the resource available for energy generation might be using technologies that we already know about. So the stuff that we have operating around Taupo, for instance. And they reckon there's enough potential to replace the coal generation, which forms the backbone of US power generation, 10 times over. Now, that would mean building an awful lot of geothermal power plants, but nevertheless, what this means is that if they wanted to, they were going to take the problem seriously, then they've got this big resource that they could be investing in. So I thought that was a good sign that that sort of work is being done in the US. Now, if only there was an American government that was willing to do something about it.
Yeah. Hey, some other good news. Solar power may be cheaper than analysts first actually realised.
Yes, absolutely. We've just talked about how a new process for printing photovoltaic cells is a potential game changer. Well, what this particular study from Queen's University is saying, if you do the proper economic analysis of current solar photovoltaic panels, then we found that they're actually cheaper than previously thought, and they're getting very close, if not already past, the point of being cheaper than fossil fuels. So the dollars per watt of electricity are kind of dropping all the time, and this is saying that if you analyze them properly, they're probably already there.
Great.
So,
that's good. That's got to be good news. Can't wait to have
absolutely.
a whole lot of solar cells on my roof at some point.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it seems.
Sorry, I'm just going to say that I calculated that I used something like 25,000 kilowatt hours of electricity last year, which is a hell of a lot. And
what was that going on?
Oh,
your sunbed?
No, well, we've got a very old house that needs heating in winter, and we use electricity to, for informal heating when we're not lighting fires, or we just, we don't need to light a fire for half an hour or whatever. So there's quite a lot of that going on. Yeah, so it was just a bit of a wake-up call, and I wondered if, well, I've been doing some sums.
Yeah.
The cost of a 10 kilowatt solar array is coming down all the time, and with the right kind of deal on a tariff from my electricity supplier, and interestingly, a blogger at Hot Topic, Thomas Everth from the North Island, blogged this week about he discovered that Meridian Energy would give you a dollar for dollar, so that if you're selling your energy back to the grid, they will deduct basically a dollar off your electricity bill.
Oh, that's cool.
And the Contact Energy do the same sort of thing for Sustainable Energy of New Zealand members. So you end up with getting a very substantial discount on your electricity bill by having these processes in place.
It's also nice what Chris Payne was saying earlier, that the plans in the future could be that when your car's not in use, it could be supplying, your electric car's not in use, it could be supplying power back to the grid at peak times. While it's just parked up, which is just the mind boggles about how that would all be set up. But it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, well, it comes down to having what they call smart meters.
Yeah,
and we could do with having those here.
Yeah, indeed. Well, it seems a shame to finish up on a bit of a downer story, but we were talking a little bit earlier about this, and may not be the full downer that it's made out to be. But Congress in the States spared the 100-watt incandescent light bulb from a government-enforced phase-out in a win for Tea Party activists over manufacturers who said they are already switching to more energy-efficient products. Basically, this was also going to be happening in New Zealand back in 2008. We were going to phase out the incandescents and bring in the energy-efficient as compulsory, so you wouldn't be able to buy the bad bulbs. But the Tea Party activists and I guess conservatives in the States have said, "Oh, over my dead body, are you going to tell me what sort of bulb I'm going to be using in my house? Less government and all that sort of rubbish." So yeah, that's not happening. So people are going to be able to continue using inefficient light bulbs.
It's really, really tragic in a way, because we've got two technologies. You've got the incandescent light bulbs that have, you can buy in any supermarket. They cost a fair bit more than an incandescent bulb, but they use a tenth of the power, and they give a perfectly acceptable light. I've got them all over the house, not everywhere, but got a fair number of them.
Yep.
And
likewise.
They're good. Yeah, they're good and they work well. And then you've got the next technology coming along. You've got LED light bulbs, which use a tenth of the electricity, I think, of the incandescents. And so you've got America trying to protect 100-year-old technology. I mean, why? It's just absurd. I'm lost for words. I'm speechless at the state of American politics.
Yeah.
And the all sorts of idiocies that are done in the name of political freedom in the US. Yeah, hell in a handbasket.
Yeah, and because often when they talk about incandescence versus energy efficient, they say, oh, it takes ages to warm up. In fact, I saw a congressman going on about how he can't see or something when he turns the light on. But now there's bulbs that actually do. They go bright straight away. You don't have to wait for them to warm up.
Oh, absolutely. And the LED bulbs are instantaneous. There's they just switch on, bang, off they go.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, it's an utter nonsense.
But I mean, I think everyone listening to this show is going to be buying the right bulb and the bulb that works for them, which will probably be an energy efficient bulb.
Yeah, and I think perhaps the most interesting thing in this is that the bulb makers are already producing better incandescents because they recognize that's the way the market's going.
Yeah.
They don't particularly want to be, bailed out by Congress because everywhere else in the world, this stuff is just taken as routine.
Yeah.
I think Australia is phasing out incandescents. I think certainly many European countries are doing it. So
it seems to be incandescents are up there with guns, from my cold dead hands or whatever it is. Come on, get over it.
Who is the Charlton Heston for incandescent bulbs in the US? I think we should be told.
We should be told. Put that in the comments section, and keep the conversation going over the holiday break. We'll be breaking now, I guess, for a few weeks. I'll be sort of more back on board from the 16th, so we should get a show going sort of late January would be our first show back, I think, Gareth.
Yeah, that's good. That gives me some time to get my voice back, he said.
Yeah, yeah. And drink in moderation, of course, over that holiday break as well.
Everything in moderation.
Everything in moderation.
As long as it's everything.
Yeah. I'm going to be heading off to the beach for a little bit. Got a nice wee holiday house I'm hiring out up further up north in New Zealand, so that's going to be nice. And just generally relaxing, really.
Yeah, well, that's good. I'm just about to. Before recording the show, I was wrestling with my Syrah, trying to tuck
Siri?
it to the top. Yeah, and no, not Siri, no, Syrah.
Syrah, the wine.
Syrah.
I
Yeah,
thought you
wine
meant
grape.
Siri, the iPhone
So
thing.
I'm hoping to get another dose of spray onto them tomorrow, and then I can forget about the vineyard for about 3 weeks, which will be very nice.
Okay. Well, excellent. Well, in the meantime, of course, everyone can find this as a video or audio podcast at theclimateshow.com and hot-topic.co.nz. So I think we used less hyperbole in that episode, Gareth, don't you think? Probably 10% less? There was some feedback from the last episode that we kind of went off the science a little bit. But I don't know, sometimes it's good, I think, to talk about things in emotional terms occasionally, but as long as you balance that up with the science, because we're all emotional beings and we all feel very strongly about this topic.
Absolutely. If I was a scientist being interviewed about my latest paper, then I would, properly express the caution of any good scientist about my results. But you and I are not scientists. What we are is commentators, and we react to the information as it comes in. And the important thing with the messages we get from climate science and technology and politics is it's a human crisis that we're facing. And so human reaction to that crisis is a natural and important part of how we handle the whole thing.
Yes, all right.
And on that philosophical point, I shall just like to wish a very Merry Christmas, or whichever seasonal festival it is that you may celebrate, and happy solstice, happy New Year. Yes, Kong Ho Fat Choi.
All the best to everyone for the festive season, and we'll see you in the new year. See you, Gareth.
Cheers, Glenn. Have a good one.